Assalamu alaikum students. This is your teacher Muhammad Umar Khattak for the subject Organizational Theory and Behavior. This is our 26th lecture and chapter number 9. And today the topic of our discussion is properties of group and group decision making. Group property number 4, size and dynamics. Does the size of a group affect the group's overall behavior? Yes, but the effect depends on what dependent variables we examine. Groups with a dozen or more members are good for gaining diverse input. If the goal is fact finding or idea generation, then larger groups should be more effective. Smaller groups of about 7 members are better at doing something productive. One of the most important findings about the size of a group concerns social loafing, the tendency for individuals to expend less effort when working collectively than when alone. Social loafing directly challenges the assumption that the productivity of the group as a whole should at least equal the sum of the productivity of the individuals in it, no matter what the group size. What causes social loafing? It may be a belief that others in the group are not carrying their fair share. If you see others as lazy or inept, you can re-establish equity by reducing your effort. But simply failing to contribute may not be enough for someone to be labeled a free rider. Instead, the group must believe the social loafer is acting in an exploitative manner. Another explanation for social loafing is the diffusion of responsibility. Because group results cannot be attributed to a single person, the relationship between an individual's input and the group's output is clouded. Individuals may then be tempted to become free riders and coast on the group's efforts. Social loafing appears to have a Western bias. It's consistent with individualist cultures such as United States and Canada that are dominated by self-interest. It is not consistent with collectivist societies in which individuals are motivated by group goals. For example, in studies comparing US employees with the employees from China and Israel, both collectivist society, the Chinese and Israelis showed no propensity to engage in social loafing and actually performed better in a group than alone. Research indicates that stronger an individual work ethic is, the less likely the person is going to engage in social loafing. Also, the greater the level of conscientiousness and agreeableness in a group, the more likely the performance will remain high whether there is social loafing or not. There are ways to prevent social loafing. Set up goals so that the group has a common purpose to strive towards. Increase intergroup competition, which focuses on the shared group outcomes. Engage in peer evaluations. Select members who have high motivation and prefer to work in groups. Base group rewards in part on each member's unique contribution. Recent research indicates that social loafing can be counteracted by publicly posting individual performance ratings for group members. Although no magic bullet will prevent social loafing, these steps should help minimize its effect. Group property number 5, cohesiveness. For a group to be highly functioning, it must act cohesively as a unit, but not because all the group members think and act alike. In some ways, the property of cohesiveness and diversity need to be valued way back at the tacit establishment of the roles and norms. Will the group be inclusive of all its members, regardless of differences in backgrounds? Now let's discuss the importance of group cohesiveness. Groups differ in their cohesiveness, the degree to which members are attracted to each other and motivated to stay in the group. Some work groups are cohesive because the members have spent a great deal of time together. The group's small size or purpose facilitates high interaction, or external threats have brought members close together. Cohesiveness affects groups' productivity. Studies consistently show that the relationship between cohesiveness and productivity depends on the group's performance related norms. If the norms for quality, output, cooperation with outsiders are high, a cohesive group will be more productive than a less cohesive group. If the cohesiveness is high and performance norms are low, productivity will be low. If cohesiveness is high, if cohesiveness is low and performance norms are high, productivity increases, but less than in high cohesiveness, high norm situation. When cohesiveness and performance related norms are both low, productivity tends to fall into low to moderate range. What can you do to encourage group cohesiveness? Number one, make the group smaller. Number two, encourage agreement with group goals. Number three, increase the time members spend together. Number four, increase the group status and the perceived difficulty of attaining membership. Number five, stimulate competition with other groups. Number six, give rewards to the group rather than to individual members. Number seven, physically isolate the groups. Group property number six, diversity. The final property of groups we consider is diversity in the group's membership, or the degree to which members of the group are similar to or different from one another. Overall, studies identify both cost and benefits from group diversity. Diversity appears to increase group conflict, especially in the early stages of a group's tenure. This often lowers group morale and raises dropout rates. One study compared groups that were culturally diverse and homogeneous, composed of people from the same country. On a wilderness survival test, the groups performed equally well, but the members from the diverse groups were less satisfied with their groups, were less cohesive, and had more conflict. Another study examined the effect of differences in tenure on the performance of 67 engineering research and development groups. When most people had roughly the same level of tenure, performance was high. But as tenure diversity increased, performance dropped off. There was an important qualifier. High levels of tenure diversity were not related to lower performance for groups when they were effective team oriented human resources practices. More specifically, groups in which members' values or opinions differ tend to experience more conflict. But leaders who can get the group to focus on the task at hand and encourage groups learning are able to reduce this conflict and enhance the discussion of group issues. Gender diversity can also be a challenge to a group, but if inclusiveness is stressed, group conflict and dissatisfaction are lowered. You may have correctly surmised that the type of group diversity matters. Surface level diversity is observably characteristics such as national origin, race, and gender, alerts people to possible deep level diversity in underlying attitudes, values, and opinions. One researcher argues the mere presence of diversity, you can see such a person's race or gender actually cues a team that there's likely to be differences of opinion. Surface level diversity may subconsciously cue team members to be more open minded in their views. For example, two studies of MBA students groups found surface level diversity led to greater openness. The effects of deep level diversity are less understood. Research in Korea indicates that putting people with high need for power with those with low need for power can reduce unproductive group competition, whereas putting individuals with similar needs for achievement may increase task performance. Although differences can lead to conflict, they also provide an opportunity to solve problems in a unique way. One study of jury behavior found diverse jurors were more likely to deliberate longer, share more information, and make fewer factual errors when discussing evidence. Altogether, the impact of diversity on groups is mixed. It's difficult to be in a diverse group in short term. However, if members can weather their differences over time, diversity may help them to be more open minded and creative to do better. But even positive effects are unlikely to be especially strong. As one review stated, the business case in terms of demonstrable financial results for diversity remains hard to support based on the extant research. Yet other researchers argue that we shouldn't overlook the effects of homogeneity, many of which can be detrimental. One possible side effect in diverse teams, especially those that are diverse in terms of surface level characteristic, is fault lines, or perceived divisions that split groups into two or more subgroups based on the individual differences such as sex, race, age, work, experience, and education. Research on fault lines has shown that splits are generally detrimental to group functioning and performance. Subgroups may compete with each other, which takes time away from the core task and harms group performance. For example, let's say Group A is composed of three men and three women. The three men have approximately the same amount of work experience and backgrounds in marketing. The three women have about the same amount of work experience and backgrounds in finance. Group B has three men and three women, but they all differ in terms of their experience and backgrounds. Two of the men are experienced while the other is new. One of the women has worked at the company for several years while the other two are new. In addition, two of the men and one woman in Group B have backgrounds in marketing while the other men and remaining two women have backgrounds in finance. It is thus likely that a fault line will result in subgroups of males and females in Group A, but not in Group B, based on the differentiating characteristics. Groups that have subgroups learn more slowly, make more risky decisions, are less creative, and experience higher levels of conflict. Subgroups may not trust each other. Finally, satisfaction with subgroups is generally high, but the overall group satisfaction is lower when fault lines are present. Are fault lines ever a good thing? One study suggested that fault lines based on differences in skill, knowledge, and expertise could be beneficial when the groups were in organizational cultures that strongly emphasized results. Why? A results driven culture focuses people's attention on what's important to the company rather than on problems arising from subgroups. Another study showed that problems stemming from groups from strong fault lines based on gender and education were counteracted when their roles were cross-cut and the group as a whole was given a common goal to strive for. Together, these strategies force collaboration between members of subgroups and focus their efforts on accomplishing a goal that transcends the boundary imposed by the fault line. Overall, although research on fault lines suggests that diversity in groups is potentially a double edged sword, recent work indicates they can be strategically employed to improve performance. Group decision making. The belief characterized by juries that two heads are better than one has long been accepted as basic component of the US legal system and those of many other countries. Many decisions in organizations are made by groups, teams, or committees. We'll discuss the advantages of group decision making along with the unique challenges group dynamics bring to the decision making process. Finally, we'll offer some techniques for maximizing the group decision making opportunity. Groups versus the individual. Decision making groups may be widely used in organizations, but are group decisions preferable to those made by the individuals alone? The answer depends on a number of factors. Let's begin by looking at the strengths and weaknesses of group decision making. Strengths of group decision making. Groups generate more complete information and knowledge. By aggregating the resources of several individuals, groups bring more input as well as heterogeneity into the decision process. They offer increased diversity of views. This opens up the opportunity to consider more approaches and alternatives. Finally, groups lead to increased acceptance of a solution. Group members who participate in making a decision are more likely to enthusiastically support and encourage others to accept it later. Weakness of group decision making. Group decisions are time consuming because groups typically take more time to reach a solution. There are conformity pressures. The desire by group members to be accepted and considered an asset to the group can squash any overt disagreement. Group discussion can be dominated by one or a few members. Groupthink and group shift. Two byproducts of group decision making, groupthink and group shift, can affect a group's ability to appraise alternatives objectively and achieve high quality solutions. Groupthink relates to norms and describes situations in which group pressures for conformity deter the group from critically appraising unusual, minority, or unpopular views. Groupthink attacks many groups and can dramatically hinder their performance. Group shift describes the way group members tend to exaggerate their initial position when discussing a given set of alternatives to arrive at a solution. In some situations, caution dominates and there is a conservative shift, while in other situations, groups tend towards a risky shift. Let's look at each phenomena in detail. Groupthink appears closely aligned with the conclusions Solomon Asch drew in his experiment with the lone dissenter. Individuals who hold a position different from that of a dominant majority are under pressure to suppress, withhold, or modify their true feelings and beliefs. As members of a group, we find it more pleasant to be in agreement, to be a positive part of the group, than to be a disruptive force, even if disruption would improve effectiveness. Groups that are more focused on performance than learning are especially likely to fall victim to groupthink and to suppress the opinions of those who do not agree with the majority. Does groupthink attack all groups? No. It seems to occur most often when there is a clear group identity. When members hold a positive image of their group they want to protect, and when the group perceives a collective threat to its positive image. One study showed that those influenced by groupthink were more confident about their course of action early on. However, groups that believe too strongly in the correctness of their course of action are more likely to suppress dissent and encourage conformity than groups that are more skeptical about their course of action. What can managers do to minimize groupthink? First, they can monitor group size. People grow more intimidated and hesitant as group size increases. And although there is no magic number that will eliminate groupthink, individuals are likely to feel less personal responsibility when groups get larger than about 10 members. Managers also encourage group leaders to play an impartial role. Leaders should actively seek input from all members and avoid expressing their own opinions, especially in the early stages of deliberation. In addition, managers should appoint one group member to play the role of devil's advocate, overtly challenging the majority position and offering divergent perspectives. Yet another suggestion is to use exercises that stimulate active discussion of diverse alternatives without threatening the group or intensifying identity protection. Have group members delay discussion of possible gains so that they can first talk about the dangers or risk inherent in a decision. Requiring members to initially focus on the negatives of an alternatives makes the group less likely to stifle dissenting views and more likely to gain an objective evaluation. Groupthink or group polarization. There are differences between group decisions and individual decisions of group members. In groups, discussion leads members towards a more extreme view of the position they already held. Conservatives become more cautious and more aggressive types take on more risk. We can view this group polarization as a special case of groupthink. The group's decision reflects the dominant decision making norm toward greater caution or more risk that develops during discussion. The shift towards polarization has several explanations. It has been argued, for instance, that discussions makes the members more comfortable with each other and thus more willing to express extreme versions of their original position. Another argument is that the group diffuses responsibility. Group decisions free any single member from accountability for the group's final choice, so a more extreme position can be taken. It's also likely that people take extreme positions because they want to demonstrate how different they are from the outgroup. People on the fringes of political or social movements take on more extreme positions just to prove they are really committed to the cause, whereas those who are more cautious tend to take more moderate positions to demonstrate how reasonable they are. So, how should you use the findings on this group shift? Recognize that group decisions exaggerate the initial positions of individual members, that the shift has been shown more often to be towards greater risk, and that which way a group will shift is a function of members' pre discussions inclination. We can now turn to the techniques by which group makes decisions. These reduce some of the most dysfunctional aspects of the group decision making. Group decision making techniques. The most common form of group decision making takes place in interacting groups. Members meet face to face and rely on both verbal and non-verbal interaction to communicate. But as our discussion of groupthink demonstrated, interacting groups often censor themselves and pressure individual members towards conformity of opinion. Brainstorming and the nominal group technique can reduce problems inherent in the traditional interacting group. Brainstorming. Brainstorming can overcome the pressures for conformity that dampen creativity by encouraging any and all alternatives while withholding criticism. In a typical brainstorming session, a half a dozen to a dozen people sit around a table. The group leader states the problem in a clear manner so all participants understand. To encourage members to think the unusual, no criticism is allowed, even of the most bizarre suggestions, and all ideas are recorded for later discussion and analysis. Members then freewheel as many alternatives as they can in a given length of time. Brainstorming may indeed generate ideas, but not in a very efficient manner. Research consistently shows individuals working alone generate more ideas than a group in a brainstorming session. One reason for this is production blocking. When people are generating ideas in a group, many are talking at once, which blocks individuals' thought process and eventually impedes the sharing of ideas. Nominal group technique. Nominal group technique may be more effective. This technique restricts discussion and interpersonal communication during the decision making process. Group members are all physically present, as in traditional meeting, but they operate independently. Specifically, a person is presented and then the group takes the following steps. Before any discussion takes place, each member independently writes down ideas about the problem. After this silent period, each member presents one idea to the group. No discussion takes place until all ideas have been presented and recorded. The group discusses the ideas for clarity and evaluates them. Each group member silently and independently rank orders that ideas. The idea with the highest aggregate ranking determines the final decision. The chief advantage of the nominal group technique is that it permits a group to meet formally but does not restrict independent thinking. Research generally shows nominal groups outperform brainstorming groups. Each of the group decision technique has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. The choice depends on the criteria you want to emphasize and the cost benefit trade off. An interacting group is good for achieving commitment to a solution. Brainstorming develops group cohesion, and the nominal group technique is an inexpensive means for generating a large number of ideas. Implication for managers. We can draw several implications from our discussion of groups. First, norms control behavior by establishing standards of right and wrong. Second, status inequities create frustration and can adversely influence productivity and willingness to remain with an organization. Third, the impact of size on a group's performance depends on the type of task. Fourth, cohesiveness may influence a group's level of productivity depending on the group's performance related norms. Fifth, diversity appears to have a mixed impact on group performance, with some studies suggesting that diversity can help performance and others suggesting the opposite. Sixth, role conflict is associated with job induced tensions and job dissatisfaction. Groups can be carefully managed towards positive organizational outcomes and optimal decision making. Some of the implications are: recognize that groups can dramatically affect the individual behavior in organization to either positive or negative effect. Therefore, pay special attention to roles, norms, and cohesion. To understand how these are operating within a group is to understand how the group is likely to behave. To decrease the possibility of deviant workplace activities, ensure that group norms do not support antisocial behavior. Pay attention to the status aspect of groups because lower status people tend to participate less in a group discussions. Groups with high status differences are likely to inhibit input from lower status members and reduce their potential. Use larger groups for fact finding activities and smaller groups for action taking tasks. With larger groups, provide measures of individual performance. To increase employee satisfaction, make certain people perceive their job more accurately. This is the end of the discussion, the lecture, and the chapter. Thank you.